There is a room inside you that you have spent your entire life avoiding. Its door is unmarked. No light seeps beneath its threshold, and yet you know it is there, have always known, because late at night, when the distractions finally cease and the world grows quiet, you hear something stirring behind that door. A sound like breathing, a presence. The mystics call it the alone meeting the alone. Carl Jung called it the confrontation with the self, but most of us call it by a different name, a name we whisper with shame: loneliness. What if I told you that loneliness is not what you think it is, that it is not a deficit to be filled, not a wound to be healed, not a problem to be solved through connection, distraction, or the frantic accumulation of relationships? What if loneliness is, in fact, an alchemical vessel, a crucible in which the lead of the isolated ego is transmuted into the gold of conscious selfhood? This is not mere poetic consolation. This is the esoteric teaching that runs like a golden thread through the mystery traditions of both East and West, from the Sufi, who retreats into the desert, to the Jungian analyze and who descends into the darkness of their own psyche. In 1913, Carl Gustav Jung experienced what he would later call his confrontation with the unconscious, a period of such profound psychological isolation that he feared he was going mad. He withdrew from the world, resigned his university post, and descended into a darkness populated by visions, autonomous figures, and a voice that was not his own, yet spoke from the deepest chambers of his being. What he discovered in that solitude was not pathology but initiation, not breakdown but breakthrough, the birth of a psychology that understood the soul not as a mechanism to be adjusted, but as a mystery to be lived. Tonight we enter that mystery. We descend into the alchemy of loneliness, not to escape it, but to understand it as the very furnace in which consciousness is forged. Before we cross the threshold into this territory, if what you have heard so far has resonated with something deep within you, if you sense that this exploration is one you need to undertake, consider subscribing and joining this fellowship of seekers. Press the like button, not as a mechanical gesture, but as an affirmation. Yes, I am willing to look at what I have been avoiding. And if this theme touches something raw in your own experience, if you have felt this aloneness, if you have sat with it in the depth of night, if you know someone who dwells in this crucible even now, leave a comment below. Your words become part of the great work. They are threads in a larger tapestry, evidence that no one walks this path entirely alone, even when it feels that way. There is a teaching in the Sufi tradition that few speak of openly. It concerns a station on the spiritual path called khalwa, the retreat into solitude. The dervish would withdraw from the world, sometimes for 40 days, sometimes longer, and sit alone in a dark cell with nothing but bread, water, and the name of God. The purpose was not asceticism for its own sake. It was the deliberate creation of a vacuum, an emptying, so that what is eternal could finally be heard above the cacophony of the temporal. Rumi writes of this in his Masnavi, in a passage that is rarely quoted because it is too dangerous, too close to the bone. He tells of a man who thought himself pious, who prayed 5 times a day, who fasted and gave alms, and yet felt nothing. No presence, no grace, only the mechanical repetition of ritual. One night, in desperation, he cried out, "Where are you? I call and hear no answer." And a voice came to him, not from without, but from within. "Your very longing is my message to you. Your restless seeking is my presence. Do you think you could seek me if you had not already found me?" This is the paradox at the heart of spiritual loneliness. The seeker is the sought. The one who feels abandoned is the very presence they long for, hidden behind the veil of identification with the ego self. Carl Jung encountered this same paradox from the other direction, through the language of psychology rather than mysticism. He spoke of the self, not the small self, the ego, the I that you think you are, but the self with a capital S, the totality of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, personal and collective, human and divine. And he made a claim that still disturbs even his most devoted students. The ego cannot reach the self through effort. It can only be reached through what Jung called the defeat of the ego. the recognition of its own insufficiency, its own inability to control, to understand, to master. Loneliness, seen through this lens, is the ego's realization that it is not the center, that it is, in fact, utterly alone in its claim to sovereignty. The self is always present, always whole, always connected to the vast web of being. But the ego, by its very nature, is isolated. It is the fragment that has mistaken itself for the whole. And so the pain of loneliness is not the pain of disconnection from others, though it may manifest that way, but the pain of the ego's exile from the self, the homesickness of the soul. The alchemists, those spiritual ancestors of depth psychology, encoded this teaching in their cryptic texts and images. They spoke of the nigredo, the blackening, the stage of putrefaction and dissolution. They depicted it as a figure alone in a dark vessel, being cooked, burned, tortured by the fire beneath. This was not a metaphor for depression, though it shares the phenomenology. It was a map of transformation. The alchemists understood that the prima materia, the raw, chaotic substance of the unconscious psyche, could only be transformed through containment and heat. The vessel must be sealed. The solitary work must be done in isolation. No one can do it for you. No relationship, no guru, no substance, no spiritual practice can substitute for the descent into your own darkness and the willingness to sit with what you find there. Jung writes in his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, about the terror of those years when he was alone with the figures of his unconscious. He describes sitting at his desk, a successful psychiatrist, husband, father, and feeling the ground opening beneath him. He began to hear voices, to see visions. A figure he called Philemon appeared to him, an old man with the wings of a kingfisher, who spoke with an authority that was not Jung's own. At first, Jung thought he was losing his mind, but then he made a radical decision. He would treat these figures as real, as autonomous, as teachers. He would enter into dialogue with them. He would submit to the process rather than fight it. This was his khalwa, his alchemical vessel, his dark night of the soul. And here is the secret, the knowledge that is hidden in plain sight. Loneliness becomes pathological only when it is resisted, when it is treated as an enemy to be defeated. But when it is entered into consciously, when it is recognized as an initiatory ordeal, it becomes the very portal to the numinous. The Sufis call this fana, annihilation, the dissolution of the false self. It is a death, yes, but a death that precedes resurrection. Jung called it the encounter with the shadow and the integration of the anima or animus, the contrasexual other within. Both are describing the same descent, the journey from the surface persona, the mask we show the world, down through the layers of repressed material, traumatic memory, and cultural conditioning, until we reach something that is no longer personal. The collective unconscious, the archetypes, the gods. And at the very bottom, or perhaps at the very top, for in this territory all directions collapse, the self, the imago Dei, the divine image in the human soul. But to reach that depth requires a quality that our culture has almost entirely lost, the capacity to be alone without filling the space. We live in an age of constant stimulation, of endless distraction. The moment we feel the first tremor of loneliness, we reach for the phone, we scroll, we message, we consume, we do anything to avoid the confrontation. And in doing so, we abort the alchemical process before it can even begin. Rumi tells another story, one that cuts to the heart of this avoidance. A man goes to a doctor and says, "I am sick, give me medicine." The doctor examines him and says, "You are not sick. You are simply not at home in yourself. You are a guest in your own house, and you treat yourself like an intruder. No medicine can cure that. You must learn to sit with yourself as you would sit with a beloved friend." The man protests, "But I am unbearable to myself. I cannot stand my own company." The doctor replies, "Then you are doubly sick. For how can you expect others to love what you yourself despise? Go home, sit, and do not rise until you have made peace with the one who lives inside your skin." This is not advice we want to hear. It is far easier to believe that our loneliness will be solved by finding the right partner, the right community, the right purpose. And yes, relationship is necessary. We are social creatures. Isolation without end is madness. But the paradox the mystics teach is this: you cannot truly meet another until you have first met yourself. And you cannot meet yourself until you have been willing to sit alone in the room you have been avoiding all your life. Jung discovered that the figures of the unconscious, the shadow, the anima, the wise old man, the self, are not abstractions. They are presences. They are, in a sense, other. And yet they are also utterly interior, utterly your own. The work of individuation is the work of recognizing that what you thought was out there, the savior, the enemy, the lover, the tyrant, is also in here, projected onto the screen of external life from the depths of your own psyche. This recognition is shattering. It means you can no longer blame your loneliness on external circumstances. It means you must take responsibility for the inner condition. And that responsibility is the heaviest burden the soul can bear, and also the only path to liberation. The Sufis speak of a station beyond khalwa, beyond the solitary retreat. They call it suhba, sacred companionship. But they are clear: suhba is only possible after khalwa. You must first learn to be alone with the alone before you can be truly present with another. Otherwise, what you call relationship is merely mutual distraction, two egos using each other to avoid the confrontation with the self. Jung echoed this in his work on projection. He wrote that in the early stages of relationship, we project the anima or animus, the inner beloved, onto the external other. We fall in love not with the person, but with our own unconscious contents reflected back to us. And this is not wrong. This is how the psyche works. But eventually, if the relationship is to become conscious, the projections must be withdrawn. The inner figures must be integrated. And that work can only be done alone, in the solitude of your own soul. The alchemical marriage is first and foremost an internal union, the wedding of conscious and unconscious, ego and self, spirit and matter. Only then can the external marriage become something more than a neurotic entanglement. There is a haunting passage in Jung's Red Book where he describes descending into the underworld and meeting a figure he calls the Red One. This figure tells him, "You wanted to escape your loneliness, and so you created me. But I am not your salvation. I am your loneliness made visible." Jung recoils. He wants to flee. But the Red One continues, "If you run from me, you run from yourself, and you will run forever, from relationship to relationship, from city to city, from project to project, always seeking what you have already abandoned within." This is the terror and the gift of the alchemical loneliness. It will not let you run. It follows you. It meets you at the end of every distraction. It waits for you in the silence after the noise. And it will continue to wait until you finally turn around and face it, until you ask not, "How do I escape this? But what is this trying to teach me?" The Sufis have a practice called muraqabah, watchfulness, meditation, the cultivation of presence. The dervish sits in silence and simply watches the movements of the heart, the thoughts that arise, the emotions that pass through. No judgment, no grasping, no pushing away, just witnessing. And in that witnessing, something begins to shift. The thoughts are seen to be not self. The emotions are seen to be weather passing through the sky of consciousness. And what remains when everything else has been witnessed and released is presence itself, pure, luminous, alone, but not lonely, whole. Jung called this the transcendent function, the capacity of the psyche to hold the tension between opposites without collapsing into one side or the other. Loneliness and connection, solitude and relationship, ego and self. The uneducated mind tries to resolve the tension by choosing a side. But the individuated psyche learns to live in the tension, to allow the opposites to constellate a third thing, a new possibility that transcends both. This is the gold that emerges from the alchemical crucible. Not the elimination of loneliness, but the transformation of it into solitude, the capacity to be alone without being lonely, to rest in the fullness of your own being without needing the world to validate your existence. And paradoxically, it is only from this place of fullness that true connection becomes possible. Because you are no longer seeking the other to complete you. You are seeking the other to meet them, soul to soul, in the mystery of two wholenesses encountering each other. Rumi writes in one of his most enigmatic quatrains, "The minute I heard my first love story, I started looking for you, not knowing how blind that was." Lovers don't finally meet somewhere. They're in each other all along. This is not romantic sentiment. This is mystical gnosis. The beloved you seek in the outer world is the reflection of the beloved within, the self, the imago Dei, the divine presence that dwells at the center of your being and has always been there, waiting for you to stop running and come home. Jung spent the latter half of his life trying to communicate this insight to a world that was not ready to hear it. He wrote about the conjunctio, the alchemical union, as both a psychological and a spiritual event. He spoke of it in terms that bordered on the mystical, on the religious, because he knew that the deepest loneliness is not psychological, but ontological. It is the loneliness of the soul in exile from its source. And the healing of that loneliness is not therapy in the conventional sense. It is initiation. It is the death and rebirth of the self. It is what the mystics have always called the great work. We have journeyed far tonight through the gardens of Persian poetry, the laboratories of medieval alchemy, the consulting room of Carl Jung in Zurich, and the dark cell of the Sufi dervish in retreat. And what have we found? Not a solution to loneliness, but a reframing of it. Not a technique to escape the pain, but an invitation to enter it so deeply that it transforms into something else entirely, into solitude, into presence, into the awakening of consciousness itself. The question is no longer, how do I stop being lonely? The question becomes, what is this loneliness asking of me? Is it asking you to stop running, to sit still, to face the figures that emerge from your own depths? Is it asking you to withdraw your projections, to take back the parts of yourself you have scattered across the world in search of validation? Is it asking you to make peace with the one who lives behind your eyes, the one you have spent a lifetime avoiding? The alchemists knew that gold cannot be created without fire. The Sufis knew that the soul cannot awaken without the annihilation of the false self. Jung knew that individuation is not a path of comfort, but a path of sacrifice. The sacrifice of who you thought you were in service of who you truly are. And all of them agree on this. The crucible cannot be shared. The descent must be made alone. But here is the final secret, the one that only reveals itself at the very end of the journey. When you reach the bottom, when you have sat in the darkness long enough that your eyes adjust and you can finally see what is there, you discover that you were never alone at all. That the presence you were seeking outside yourself has been inside you all along. That the loneliness was not separation, but forgetting. And the awakening is simply remembering what you have always been, not a fragment, but the whole. Not isolated, but utterly interconnected with all that is. The alone meeting the alone, and discovering they are one.